And we're live. Hello, everybody. Today, our show is on contracts with Sue Leschen. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Julia.
And as you just heard, I'm Julia. I'm Julia Poger. I'm a business, conference, and diplomatic interpreter. I work from Russian and French into English and from English into Russian. And as you probably know, I also run a business called Know Your Worth, which helps interpreters and really any service professional to understand how to get your name out and sell your services so that you can get work at your fees and your conditions. And I'd love it if you would write in the comments where you're listening in from today. So before we move into our topic, I'd just like to ask you to stick around until the end of the show to find out what we'll be talking about next time. So, on to our show. Today with Sue, we're going to be talking about contracts, which are very important to anybody who's providing any kind of a service. Yet interpreters who should know better, this is you, are working without any kind of a document at all. I even know interpreters who have other businesses, for example, who might own real estate, and they would never think of renting out an apartment without having a lease, but they have no problem going out and working for somebody without a contract. My special guest today is Sue Leschen. Yep, Sue is a well-known entrepreneurial lawyer and linguist who combines her twin passions of law and languages. She's also the director of the niche market company Advocate or Avocate. I'm not quite sure, Sue. I should have asked ahead of time. Legal and Business Financial Interpreting and Translation Services Limited. The link will be under this show after the show is over. Her company not only drafts terms and conditions for colleagues, but will also look at a client's terms and conditions to make sure that you're getting a fair deal with your contracts. So she's also a member of several I can speak today, several interpreter associations, which goes to show how seriously she takes her profession of interpreter. Sue and I have met several times, most recently during the Interpreters' Day of the Chartered Institute of Linguists in London, where she's a member of the Interpreters Division Steering Group and where we were both speaking. I really liked her approach to contracts. It was very clear. So I invited her to join me here. And I can't think of anybody better to talk about contracts, really. So thanks again, Sue, for coming today.
You're very welcome.
And our first question is contracts and terms and conditions. Is there a difference? What are they? Can you define them for us, for those of us who are newbies?
Right. Well, contracts in law are composed of several elements. And the main ones are that you have to have an offer, you have to have an acceptance of the offer, you have to have what's called consideration, and you also have to have an intention to create legally binding relations. So if we just start at the top with offers, for example, an offer of an interpreting job. So I don't think that should cause anybody any problems. Then you have to have acceptance. So if a client offers us a job, we either decide to accept it or we reject it. Then we have to talk about what's called consideration, which actually means, in simple terms, how much are we actually going to get paid for this job? So it's in our case, it's a financial consideration. And lastly, we have to have, as I've mentioned, an intention to create legally binding relations. So a contract, obviously, to do a job is different from just promising to do the job, because we are creating a legally binding relationship. We're not just saying, oh, okay, I promised to cut your lawn, and saying that's a contract, because it can't possibly be a contract because there's no financial element involved. Unless, of course, you set up a contract whereby you get paid to mow somebody's lawn and you've got an intention to create a legal relationship. Maybe, you're taking on a gardener or something like that. In terms of terms and conditions, that's one of those phrases that where really terms mean conditions and conditions mean terms, but we always say, don't we, terms and conditions. You can
We
have
do.
terms and conditions without having a contract. For example, I could put a term in one of my contracts that if I'm doing some remote interpreting, for example, that I want to be paid for the use of my voice and also for the use of my visual appearance on a video that has been made. Yes. And a lot of interpreters don't realize, do they, Julia, that they actually have this right to charge for the use of their voice and or visual image.
That's exactly right. And I keep seeing T&Cs everywhere, and I have some T&Cs that I'm working on my own websites, that I just post on my website, for example. And that way I can just refer to them and say, oh, just go to my T&Cs and you can see what the terms and conditions are. So I don't have to have like pages and pages and pages of things that I'm sending to somebody in an email. So having said that, then, does the contract need to be a formal one? I mean, does it have to be one of those, party A says this and party B says that, and here are the terms and conditions and so on? Or can it just be like, hey, would you like to mow my lawn this summer?
Okay, the contract can be expressed very formally. I'm sure we're all very used to signing contracts, for mobile phones and telephone services and whatever else, whatever equipment we use, laptops and so on. And many of the contracts are pages and pages, aren't they? And we scroll down and we scroll down, and then eventually we find the signature box and we sign. I think if most people are really honest, they probably don't even bother reading most of the clauses. But that is one type of contract, very complicated, 6, 7, 10-page contract. And I know that some of us, for some interpreting jobs, we get sent those kind of contracts. I often think that some of the clients send them to us because they really know we're not going to be bothered reading them, unfortunately, because of time and so on. They're trying to blind us with science, maybe. But no, I mean, contracts don't have to be like that. I mean, you can have, just 5 or 6 clauses about a specific job. And, if all the elements of a contract are satisfied, that I've mentioned, the offer, the acceptance, the consideration, the intention to create legally binding relationships, then you've got a contract. Equally so, and I think, Julia, you've mentioned this when we talked about this session, you can have a contract that has been arrived at by virtue of emails going back and forwards, the agency,
so
the client.
In one email, hey, are you available? So for example, in the first email, are you available? In the next email, we have a job on that day at 10 o'clock. Can you come? And so on. So that, okay. And how would you make that one as binding as that 1,000,000-page one with lots of fine print in it? How would you make the emails just as binding then?
Well, what I would do is send a further email at the end of all the negotiating emails, and I would set out what I think has been agreed, what I think the contract is. And in my experience, I sometimes think, am I on a different planet to the client? Because it sometimes seems that what they think they've agreed isn't necessarily what I think we've agreed. And so that for that reason, I will set out in a final email, thanks for your emails of such and such date. And I just want to confirm that our agreement is as follows. And then I will just list, probably just bullet points, the date of the job is, the venue is, you're supplying the microphones and the booths. I agree to accept whatever the fee is for the job. My cancellation fee is X amount of whatever dollars or pounds sterling, whatever the currency is, and so on and so on. And then just say at the end of that bullet point list, please email me just to confirm that this is your understanding of what's been agreed. And I wouldn't do anything until I've got that confirmation that that is what they think we've agreed. And quite often when you do that, they will come back to you and say, oh, no, I didn't realize we'd agreed to pay you a cancellation fee. Oh, I didn't realize that you wanted to copyright your, your visual image. Yeah. So I find that, to be a really useful experience. But I think also in terms of probably a lot of colleagues don't always realize that you can make what's called a verbal contract. And again, as long as you've got all those elements of a contract present, you could, for example, have a video call, a phone call with the client, and, nothing at this point is in writing. You've just, you've talked to me, you've asked me if I'm available, I've given you my fees and my conditions and so on. And there we have a contract. But I would certainly, if that is how we're playing it, I would very, very soon after that conversation write back to the client and say, thank you very much for our call on such and such. And again, your bullet point list, this is what has been agreed. Please confirm. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that sounds so much easier. Because that way you don't have to dig through all the emails. That last email that you would send, would it be in the same chain or would it be a separate email?
No, I put it in the same chain because, I think the sake of the ease of reference and consistency. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And we have Agnieszka who has joined us and says, oh, yes, a brief confirmation by the client is essential, especially with the cancellation fee and additional copyright fees.
Yes.
Yes. I have to admit, I even had a client once, a lawyer even, who signed our contract without reading it. We didn't know that she didn't read it. And it included a clause on reading time. So we were going to be read into the case. So we took a certain amount of time. She sent us all the documents, and we read them all. And then we billed, and there was the reading time billing. And she wrote back and said, "Oh no, I didn't agree to that." I'm like, "Well, yeah, actually you did. It's in the contract that you signed." And it went back and forth a couple of times. And she finally, we have lots of other cases we could hire you for. And I'm like, well, great, sign a contract with me right now for all of those cases, for all of those days. And, with cancellation clause of 100%, and I'll be happy to waive the reading in fee right now. And of course,
can I just ask you, Julia, what do you mean by the reading fee? Do you mean the time to read the contract or the time to read documents which will help you prepare for the job? Oh, okay, for the job. Okay.
Yeah, the document. Yeah. No, the contract, that's on my own head. That's my own overhead.
Yeah, that's your own time.
When the lawyers send you, 2,000 pages of documents, I'm not going to, read that. That's not going to be my bedtime reading for a month and a half. The job is in a week. I need to actually spend a day reading those documents and getting prepared for the case. So they need to pay for that time. So we call it in English, in American English, I don't know what you call it in British English, but we call it a reading in fee. So I've been read into the case.
Yeah, that's why I was querying, because I wasn't quite sure what you meant. We would either call it a prep fee, a preparation fee, or reading time fee, I suppose. And I'm just quite often shocked by the amount of colleagues who do not bill or do not negotiate any kind of clause on reading time, because sometimes the reading time can be just a couple of pages involved. Okay, we're not probably too worried about that, unless, of course, you have to do quite a lot of research. I did some interpreting for a very big internet company, and they just sent me a couple of pages, but they were very, very technical. I didn't even understand them in English, let alone in French, which is my language.
Okay.
And I had to do a huge amount of research just on 2 pages. So, once I saw, I think it's a really good idea, actually, as part of your contract to negotiate that you get these documents up front, but in advance, not just the day before.
Yeah.
You need at least 7 days, at least,
That's
maybe
that
more.
is one of the things. Oh
Yeah.
dear. Either I have frozen or you have frozen. So just the end of what you said, I didn't catch. I'm not quite
Oh,
sure. But in any case, I fully agree with everything I heard, which is, you certainly want to get paid for your prep time. And one of the things that you can use as a bargaining chip in your negotiating is also the preparation time / reading in fee. So for example, I just used that reading in fee in my story as a way of bargaining with that lawyer when she said, well, we have plenty of other cases. And I'm like, okay, sign on the dotted line right now, and I will waive my reading in fee for this case, right? So that became a bargaining chip in that negotiation. It also showed up very quickly that she had no other cases, and she was just trying to get on my good side and try and make me reduce my fee. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't an enormous amount. I think we were only charging them about 1,200 euros for the reading in, but it was still, per person, obviously, but it was still something that she wasn't expecting because she didn't read the contract.
No.
So the next question.
Could I just go back to reading time? I personally nearly slipped up only this week when I was negotiating a contract for an interpreting job that it's a legal job, not surprisingly, because I work in the legal field. And this involved witness statements that I would need to see to prepare for actually a disciplinary hearing that I'm going to be interpreting in next week. And I said to the client that one of my terms was going to be that I needed the documents up front. I gave them 7 days, as the time in my clause. And then I gave them a fee, and I regretted afterwards what I'd done, but I was able to salvage it, actually. I said to them, oh, I will charge you such and such an amount if it's only 1 witness statement, or if it's only 2 witness statements. I gave them quite a reasonable fee. And then I suddenly thought, with hindsight, you stupid Sue Leschen, because how do you know that the witness statements are just going to be really short ones? Even though there's only 1 or 2, they could be very, very lengthy ones. And actually, that's what happened. That when she sent the first one through, it was 20 pages. And then the second one came through, and that was 35 pages.
Wow.
So I really think you need some kind of clause in your contracts where you are actually specifying that my reading fee is such and such rate per hour. You can do it like that. And then you can give an estimate separately in an email, that I estimate on the basis of the documentation that you've notified me about, or the documentation that you've already sent me, that my reading time is going to be 4 hours or however long, or 1 day, if it's a huge amount. But just watch for that one, because the clients will quite happily say, oh, it's just 1 witness statement, and in fact, in this case, it was a project manager that said, oh, Sue, don't worry about it. It's just a couple of short witness statements. And I stupidly and very naively, with hindsight, believed her that she knew what she was talking about. And I don't think she'd even seen them when she told me that. So you really need some fairly tight terms and conditions like that.
And I think that we've just given great examples for why we have contracts anyway, in general, because otherwise people will, you give them this and they'll take this, or more. they'll take much more than what you're asking about. I remember a colleague of mine saying that they said, that there's a cancellation fee of whatever, and if it's canceled less than this time, then you have to pay me 100%. And so the client decided not to cancel, but to have that colleague on site all day doing nothing. Or doing, and they tried to get them to do something else. Like they tried to get them to translate instead of interpret when they don't translate, or they tried to get them to do, phone calls instead of whatever. And so, the contract basically said, if you don't, if I'm not interpreting, the cancellation fee is due. So they were able to get out of that. But we've also mentioned a few other examples. For example, the cancellation clause, the copyright fee, why we have contracts. And I still remember one wonderful comment somebody gave to me once about why we have a contract. It's to make sure that you push as much responsibility onto the other party as possible, but you're very clear about the things that you provide. So maybe you could comment on that for a second, Sue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good response that somebody gave you, and or good advice. I mean, we have contracts really, bottom line, for certainty, so that everybody knows, all the parties to the contract know where they stand. And frankly, even if the client hasn't read your contract and they've just signed it, well, that's their problem. And I think we want contracts set up because if in the event of something going wrong, I mean, I suppose 9 times out of 10, most of us probably get through our working lives without too many problems, certainly when we've been working for a few years and we're getting more experience and so on with working with clients. But it's just always that outside sort of chance that something could go badly wrong, like what you've just described, Julia, where the client was actually asking the interpreter to do some translation. And, the translation work certainly was not part of that contract. And I think most of us, we call it public service interpreting in the UK when we're working for courts and tribunals and so on. Many of my colleagues and myself, we're routinely asked by judges in the middle of hearings and so on to we're handed a newspaper article or and just given it there and then. We've never seen it in our lives before, and it's all about the witness or the defendant, and we're being asked, oh, can you do like an on-site translation of that? And it's quite scary, really. And some colleagues will actually just say, oh, okay, I'll go along with it, and they do it. And then other colleagues are saying, no, it's not in my contract. I'm not a translator, I'm an interpreter. And then other colleagues, it's a bit of a grey area, to be honest with you, because other colleagues will say, oh, well, it's on-site interpreting. It's kind of oral translation. That's another way of looking at it. But I mean, my take on it really would be it's not really within your contract if you've, been booked as an interpreter.
Okay. Yeah. And I don't do a lot of public service I don't do any public service interpreting here. When I lived in the US, I did some public service interpreting, but because of the setup of the courtrooms and so on, I don't think the judge could have asked me to do that in that particular in those instances when I was there. So I've never run into that, luckily, because I don't know what I would have said. So Nora says, and it's fairly long, I put in my offers that the fee includes preparation based on the documents that I will receive by the client 1 week before the job at the latest. And then I take that as my permission to face the documents. I think it's very important to communicate to clients that we always prepare because they do not always realize. And yes, it is best to specify what amount of prep time is included in the fee. And, if there's more to do, I will charge more. Which is really nice.
I think that's really great, Nora. And that sounds like you really have got to grips with sorting clients out in this respect. But also, I think what we need to bear in mind is any of us who do business interpreting. I do a lot of business meetings and so on. or any sort of interpreting where you might not just be getting documents from the client, you might also be receiving PowerPoints, their training, PowerPoints for their companies, or you might also be getting YouTube videos. So rather than actually put in your contract just a clause relating to preparing documents, it's really helpful actually if you put in a clause relating to materials. I think materials is probably a wider term, and you can specify in brackets, if you like, or in a drop down list, materials means blah blah blah, and then just put in all the likely materials that you think might be coming your way. And I'm a
sure to
victim
say
of,
that
sorry, go
it's
ahead.
not make sure that you write that it's not an exhaustive list, because if you forget
Yes,
to put
yes,
PowerPoints on and you don't say that, then they're going to say, but you didn't tell me you wanted PowerPoints. You have to
yeah,
make sure that there's an etc. in there somewhere.
yes, and
Agnieszka actually said that too. Another useful clause is that we guarantee high quality of
all
interpretation so long as the
materials.
client provides all materials. Yes.
Yes,
Speakers, notes, presentations, no later than 5 working days. And it's true. The client may have seen them in the TNCs if they read them, but it makes sure that the client knows that we need the preparation.
yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of points there, Agnieszka. I personally would try and ask for more than 5 working days before the event, because 5 working days actually is not probably going to be very long time. And if you're getting to day 4 and you still, and this happens to all of us, you still haven't had any materials, or maybe you've had 1 or 2, but they're still trying to get more. You're running out of time really seriously. So I try to give them quite a long period, in which to provide me with the materials, like I'll say 14 days. And then after maybe 4 days, I'm starting to email them saying, just a polite reminder, that I need these materials. Another thing I think we can do quite usefully is prepare a document with a tick box list, and just head it something like materials required by interpreter for the job or assignment, whatever we want to call it. And then send that to the client. And then you can put a list of YouTube videos, PowerPoint presentations, whatever, and get them to tick, or get the agency, if you're working through an agency, to tick what it is that they are going to send you. And then, you can attach that to your contract, or put a clause in the contract that refers to that list. And another, I could talk for Manchester, where I'm based, on this, or England, whatever we want to call it, about this kind of thing. And it's something that really bothers me a lot, where you think you're really ready to go with the job because you've done all possible preparation. You've gone back and forwards through the videos they've sent you that are going to be part of the presentation, the speaker's presentation. And then lo and behold, they start playing the videos, and you're happily interpreting because you know this, you've worked it out, you've done the research. And then suddenly the video goes off tangent. It's not the one that you've been sent to prepare. They've changed it.
Okay.
And that is really quite frightening, when you think, oh my God, this isn't the one that I prepared. They've changed it.
Right.
And maybe that's what marks good interpreters from, sorts us out from the ones who aren't so good, because oh boy, you're really suddenly having to really think on your feet because things have changed. So I think it's really worth having a clause in your contract that's actually saying that if there is any change made to any of the materials that you're being provided with, that this must be notified to you, for example, at least 48 hours before the event. Yeah.
Well, Agnieszka wanted to clarify. She says, I ask for the materials ASAP, but with less than 5 working days, the client cannot complain about any performance that they think there might have been an issue with, because they did not live up to the contract and they did not give the preparation. So I think that's also a really nice way of handling things, to remind them that it's their fault that there was not the perfect interpreting. One of the things that I always thought I might do, but I haven't yet worked with a partner who has had the same backbone that I seem to have, but I always want to charge the client more if they don't give me documents on time. So, for example, if if I know it's going to take me 2 full days to read the documents, if I don't get the documents 5 days in advance, or if I only get them 5 days in advance, I'm adding 2 days of interpreting time to my contract. So if let's pretend my fee was 1,000 whatevers, I'll add in 1,000, 2,000 to the interpreting fee because I can't work for 2 days. I haven't had to do that yet because my clients have also
agree to that. That's very interesting, Julia. Do they agree?
Well, as I said, I proposed it, but the clients always seem to get the things in on time. And my partners are always rather nervous about stating something like that. But I do know of another colleague who has done it and has definitely gotten extra interpreting days paid for if the documents came in late, because the interpreter would have to spend a certain amount of time preparing for that particular mission. So yeah, it has gotten paid, not by me, because I guess I'm threatening enough, but but by others. Yeah, but for others.
That's really
okay.
interesting.
So I haven't. It is. The only problem with it. The only problem with it is it gives people permission. So if you've read the book Freakonomics, there's this really interesting bit in the book where they say this woman had a daycare and it was, pick up your kids by 6. Pick up your kids by 6. Just, we are not holding your kids after 6. And people would be late all the time. And she was getting really antsy about it. So she decided she was going to charge. So she decided to charge a certain amount of money if you are late by up to an hour, et cetera. And so more people started being late because they were given permission to be late by paying the fee. And
yes, there is
that's an issue, because if I make the client need to pay me extra, then they're just going to be late because they can, rather than being early and then not having to pay anything. They may just, oh, well, whatever, we can afford that. So you have to make it big.
If money is no object, then there certainly would be that risk. One thing that I would like to mention at this point is I'd be really interested to hear from colleagues out there. Do you negotiate any sort of clause relating to provision of materials whereby you're saying if the materials do not arrive by the given date in the contract, if you've given them, say, 5 working days or whatever, that I will consider myself discharged from working on this assignment? In other words, what you're saying is, if you don't get the materials to me in time, I'm not going to go ahead with this. Because I've got a couple of colleagues who are doing it.
No, go ahead. You have a couple of colleagues?
No, I was just thinking, I have got a couple of colleagues who are beginning to talk about that. And then generally what we've been talking about in the UK about this kind of situation is, if we don't get the materials or all of them up front before the job, or we're getting them the morning of, or even I've had them at lunchtime on the day of the job, I'm sure that's happened to most of you out there. But if we're getting them that late, obviously we're not going to be preparing maybe as well as we would have liked to. And we maybe are putting our reputations at risk because we're not going to be properly prepared. And what is really worrying in these days of being recorded, remote interpreting and so on, is if we mess up, either badly or just to some extent, we're also being recorded. So I'd be really interested to know what colleagues think about that one, because I've heard of some colleagues now putting clauses in their contracts to the effect of, if the materials are arriving later than the agreed time, I am prepared to go ahead with the assignment, but I'm basically warning you that there is a possibility that my interpreting will not be as of such a high standard as I would have liked it
Mm-hmm.
to have been. So you're warning the
Right.
client that, you know, things might not be so
Mm-hmm.
good. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
personally quite a good way of putting it, because in the event of your interpreting not being as good as you would have liked it to be, and then you do mess up a bit, and then the client complains
Mm-hmm.
later, then they're going to have no leg to stand on, because you put it in your
Right.
contract that you'll do your best in the absence
Mm-hmm.
of all the materials, or the materials arriving very late, but you can't give them any
Mm-hmm.
guarantee of a, you know, a very good standard. So
Mm-hmm.
you're basically
That's
putting
right.
them and their event at risk, and they know it.
Right. Well, from my own experience, there's a couple of things there that I could unpack. One is that I always have in there that interpreting is a best human effort, which means that
Mm-hmm.
they can't compare me to somebody else. They also can't compare me to AI, because it's my
Hope
best
not.
effort. And therefore, no, of course not. I'm so much, no, I know. But for example, if the two of us were working, you know, they couldn't compare us because it would be my best human effort and your best human effort, which are different humans and therefore different efforts. So I make sure that the words best human effort are always in my contracts. That's from my US background. Um, also, there's the idea of a disclaimer. As an interpreter who is often streamed, because I work for international organizations, those international organizations have a disclaimer put up either on the website, under the streaming, or somewhere visible. And I also include it in my own contracts when I'm not working with international organizations, that basically says the interpretation is there to ensure communication or to facilitate communication. It is not to be held as, it does not have the same force as the original, you know, and some type of disclaimer that basically says that you don't have to, you know, I'm not going to get sued if I say a million instead of a billion, for example. Um,
Oh,
so I
that
always include that.
worries me. That, Julia, that worries me just a little bit, because what you've just said about the million instead of the billion. Because what if you're
Mm.
interpreting for a company and you make that mistake, and that figure is
But I'm
really vital information?
but I'm talking about streaming here. So this is
Okay.
in particular, this is about streaming, right? So that I can't be held liable for something that I said because I'm not the original speaker, I'm the interpreter. So it's the
Mhm.
original speaker who is making these proposals. This is also something that's
Sure.
important, especially in international criminal cases and so on, if they're being streamed or watched, because of course the criminal is trying to get out of having done something. They're trying to get people to think that they didn't do it when they did. And so I don't want to get sued, for example, for fraud or for whatever else, or that I was taking his side, because obviously I'm taking his side verbally because I'm saying what he said. So there's a lot of unpacking to go on in there. At one point, I have two other examples, and then we've got a reply from somebody out there. There's the bait and switch thing where somebody has offered me a contract, an agency, and let's pretend at 1,000. Okay, we'll just say it's at 1,000 whatevers. It could be rubles, it could be, you know,
Mhm.
hryvnia, it could be dollars, it could be whatever. And I say yes, send me the contract. And you know, it's far enough in advance. Several days later, they get back to me and they say, okay, so for the job that you've agreed to do for us, we can't pay you 1,000 anymore. We can only pay you 750. And are you still, you know, and so the job is on, you know, on Monday, it's Friday, and
Mhm.
we'll be paying you 750. And I'll be like, well, first of all, I haven't had a contract, so I don't know that I'm even going. You haven't sent me the piece of paper that tells me where I need to be, what time I need to be there, so on.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, I'm not. And since we verbally agreed to 1,000, I'm sticking with 1,000. If you want to pay me 750, go find somebody else. And they were
Mm.
like, but it's in 2 days. And I'm like, yeah, it's your problem, isn't it? And so they
Mm.
had to, and I said, I won't show up to the job if I don't have the contract before the job starts. So,
Mm.
you know, and so there's been that kind of thing as well. Nora says, Agnieszka says, I'm sorry, something came in really quickly, that we will do our best, but it may not be as good as when we get the materials, we've had a situation where some of the presentations have had to be re-recorded for publication, and the client paid an additional fee for our additional time. So not discharging, but Nora said something. I think it would be very difficult to say you consider yourself discharged. I think warning the client is good, but we can't threaten to withdraw from the job. Also, because often they are not actually in power. If the CEO does not finish their PowerPoint, what can the agency do, for example? So you can't just say you're going to walk off the job if the CEO going through the agency hasn't sent you something. So I'm thinking other colleagues are thinking it's not necessarily something that's doable.
I think in practice it would be very, very difficult to do. But on the other hand, think about it. You haven't actually got to the assignment yet. The assignment says, using your last example, Julia, it's on Monday, and you gave them until yesterday to provide you with all the materials, and you put a clause in the contract that failing which, if the materials didn't arrive by Friday, that you would consider yourself discharged from the job. So they've had the warning, they've signed that clause in your contract. Well, they've signed the whole contract with that clause in it. So they know.
If they've read it. If
they've read it. And yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I very much doubt, talking about reading contracts. And I think I'm being really honest here. I think this works both ways, both with clients and colleagues. Who actually sits down and reads a contract from beginning to end? And I think very, very few people do. And I
would hope that my lawyer client would do so. I would truly hope that my lawyer client would do so.
You would, but I mean, lawyers are very hard pressed for time. And, what lawyers are taught in law school, and I can tell you this from experience, is speed reading. And, even if you don't actually do a specific course on it, you kind of get to do it because you're so busy and you just learn how to do it. And I always say to colleagues, when you get contracts and you haven't got really very much time to read them, whether it's for your internet connection or broadband or whatever type of contract, or it's for an assignment, an interpreting assignment, at least look at the major clauses. If you can't sit down for an hour and look at it properly, look at the financial aspect. How much are they paying you? What are the payment terms? What is the jurisdiction? If there is a dispute, is it going to be, in my case, England and Wales, or I'm working for an American client? Oh gosh, it's America. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure.
No, it's not America. It's not America. It's California, or it's New York, because every state has their own jurisdiction.
Yeah, different states, and I'm thinking, I don't want to touch this. I really want the job, but I don't want to be mixed up with, different state legislation in America or whatever. So, you really kind of can pinpoint certain subheadings, because all contracts should have subheadings. There might be a subheading, for example, on copyright, and you're a bit worried, oh gosh, they're going to be recording me and stuff. And at what point do I negotiate copyright? What should I be saying? Well, okay, hone in on the contract aspects and just make sure it suits you, that they are retaining all of the copyright in your recording. And you're thinking, not sure about this.
And speaking about recordings, Michael was just saying that he'd like to know if this is going to be recorded. And despite having practiced for years, he's learning a lot from this session. So thank you, Michael. Yeah. It is recorded on LinkedIn. It is recorded on LinkedIn, and it will be on my YouTube channel with the other Ask Me Anythings. I'm going to move on to a couple of other, we spent a lot of time on several things. So I think I'm going to do a really quick thing with an anecdote from me. I don't know if Sue has something to add to it, but we'll keep it short. When should you make sure to sign a contract? The reason I'm asking this, and the reason I'm telling you the story, is that I know an interpreter who works on the private market who sent out contracts to interpreters that interpreter did not know. The consultant interpreter did not know them, but knew them from reputation, knew that they were good. Sent them contracts they had already agreed, and all the terms and conditions were agreed, and was waiting to get them back, and didn't get them back. And the interpreters were not signing them and sending them back. And when the consultant interpreter showed up for the job, those interpreters then handed her the signed contracts. And the consultant interpreter was really surprised because for her, it was, I need you to prove to me that you're going to show up. I was scared that you were not going to come. So you should have signed this and sent it to me, weeks ago when I sent it to you. And these interpreters were used to working for international organizations, such as, for example, the UN, where often you don't get your contract until the day that you're working, or the day,
Really?
or sometimes even afterwards, just because they're so so built up with so much to do. You're working it. And so but you have to sign the contract to get paid, not to prove that you're going to be there, but to get paid afterwards. So keep in mind, I know it's a really strange thing, but keep in mind that when somebody sends you a contract, sign it right away. Sign it right away, because I've also had the case where somebody sent me a contract, I signed it right away, sent it back, and then they canceled the job, like at an international organization. They canceled the job like a day later, but they still had to pay me because I had signed the contract. If I had not signed the contract, I would not have gotten paid for that cancellation, or I could not. They could have not paid me. They would have, because this is a nice organization. I'm not telling you which one. Mine, thank you. but they didn't have to pay me unless I had already signed that contract. So when would you sign a contract? And then we'll move on quickly to the next question, because it's obviously a no-brainer.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It is, Julia, because a lot of colleagues don't actually realize, and not just our colleagues, a lot of people in general don't realize that if your contract's not signed, it's not valid, So you must make sure you sign contracts. And even, for example, if a client asks me to send them an estimate of my fees, and remember, an estimate can be changed. They're not legally binding. That's the difference between an estimate and a quote. Quotes are legally binding. But even if I send my estimate to the client, I will actually have a little clause at the bottom which says signed by the client, dated by the client. And I get them to sign and date my estimate by way of acceptance of that estimate. And that is in itself a form of contract. Yeah, and or you can do the same actually with quotes. You can get the client to sign the bottom and date the bottom by way of acceptance, and you can sort of say that you will not start work until this estimate or quote, whatever, has been signed. You will not, consider yourself bound.
Which is a nice way of doing it. Just to answer Agnieszka's question, the consultant interpreter did ask for the contracts, but obviously when asking, the interpreters themselves were hearing what they expected to hear and not what a private market person was asking them for. And so they really just hadn't realized that they needed to do this because they never worked on the private market. So to move on to a much more interesting thing, I did want to get that out there, though, because I want people to keep in mind who your client is and what their expectations might be. The next question would be, can you change a contract? Can it be changed?
That's a very
I have an answer, but
question. Go ahead, Julia.
Can you change a contract? I mean, I have a little answer, and it's only good in the United States, really, in that jurisdiction, which is that, once you've signed it, supposedly not. But if in the process of signing it, you see something that you don't like. So, for example, an agency will have a non-compete clause that will be 5 years long, which is ridiculous. I mean, it is absolutely not acceptable. So you cross off the 5 years and you write 1 year. And then you initial it and date it. If they initial and date it as well, it's changed. It has been changed. But you need to also understand, and this is for Sue, this is my favorite thing about US law. If the jurisdiction of that contract was in a particular state, let's say I was living in DC, in Washington, DC, and the contract was with the company that's based in California, even though the work is going to happen in DC. In the contract, it says the jurisdiction for this contract is California. which for me would be very onerous because first of all, I'd have to hire a lawyer all the way out there. I might have to go there, which was expensive. I'm sure it's even more expensive now. But if we change something in there and they agree to it, the jurisdiction of the contract can then be automatically either California or DC. I love that. I
Ooh.
found something to change in every single contract every time, just so that I would have that one little thing. But anyway, once you've signed the contract, once you've agreed to it, can a contract be changed
Well, I
from a
mean,
lawyer's
that's,
point of view?
yeah, yes and no. I mean, once you've signed the contract, it's, you know, as we've said earlier, it's legally binding. But if you've got a clause in that contract that says, in the event of such and such happening, for example, the date of the event being postponed, that another date will be notified, you know, where there's some kind of possibility of change, then a new contract can be agreed. Then if that's already in the existing contract, then yes. Yeah.
I'm assuming also for force majeure, things could change. So for
Yeah,
example, when
of
COVID
course.
happened,
Yeah.
you know, I had a contract with a hotel to provide the services for the venue for the conference interpretation course that I run once a year. Obviously, it couldn't be held in person because everybody was in lockdown at the time. And all the hotels said was, let's just take this contract and we will move it to the next year. And
Yes. Well,
everything will
that's a
stay
good
the same. It's
example.
just
Yeah.
that the date is changing. So in that way, you can change it. Could you add a
Yes.
rider to a contract
Yes.
afterwards?
Yes. You can add riders to contracts that in the event of such and such happening, that the parties can then negotiate, you know, towards a solution or whatever. You can do that. What I think is even more interesting, Julia, is where you've just mentioned, and I think you're absolutely right, you will sometimes look at clauses and try to amend them in your favor, obviously, which is always a good idea. And then you will you will initial that clause that you've amended, and you will then send the contract back signed with your amended clause or clauses. That's great. I've got lots of colleagues who do that kind of thing in the UK as well. What I think is interesting is, do you, in your covering email, say to the client, this is what you've done, or do you just send the amended contract back, just saying, oh, thank you very much for the draft contract. I'm now returning it to you, or a copy of it, duly signed. And then you just leave it up to them to kind of read it and then think, oh, Julia Poger's just changed clause 4. Or, as it may well be, they don't bother to read it, and you haven't notified them you've actually changed clause 4.
Yeah. I would have to notify them in the US anyway, because it would only take effect if they also initialed it. If what I'm wondering, though, I would probably have to ask a lawyer about this. If I initial and date it, because I initial and date it, and then I sign and date the contract. If I initial and date it, and I sign the contract, and I've changed that clause from 5 to 1, for example, is it legal? Is the contract then legally binding on me as a whole because I've changed something? And that I'd have to ask, but I always get them to see it and then to initial and date it as well. Otherwise, it doesn't become binding for sure. I mean, that I know for sure. But I'm just wondering that if I'm the only one who initials and dates it, is the whole contract binding on me then? And there I would have to take legal advice in the legal jurisdiction that I live and not where I actually am. It's a fascinating puzzle.
It is. I mean, I would be very wary of depending on a client realizing that there is a change, you know, an amendment, even if you've signed and initialed it, if you haven't notified them that you've done that. I mean, it might actually harm you, because if they don't know, because they'll be proceeding on the basis of the old contract, which might not be what you want. Maybe you've amended the clause about extra reading time money or something like that, and they don't know. So then you're going to have a God Almighty dispute at the end of all of that. So I would probably err on the side of saying to them, in an email that, this is my suggested redrafting of clause 5 or whatever. Do you agree? If you agree, please can you return this, to me, duly initialed and signed. What I would say as well is, if you're just perhaps renegotiating a couple of fairly minor clauses, it's probably okay to stick with the original contract and both sides just initial and sign. But if you're renegotiating something, a lot of it, you're basically going through with a red pen and think, I don't want this, I don't want that, where's my copyright money? And, they're using my image, and
I would just send my own contract by that point.
Yeah, I mean,
I would just send my own contract at that point.
Yeah, if it's getting into really big changes, really, I think what you're doing is looking at a brand new contract. And, I think we can be really smart here, and like Julia is saying, we are business people, we really ought to be. We're running our own businesses, and we ought to have some kind of contract on standby, whether you call it a master copy or I call it a mistress copy, being a woman, and I have that ready, and I can cut and paste and send to clients, this is my suggested version of clause 3. Do you agree? And frankly, a lot of project managers either don't read contracts. We all know that. They don't. Some of them have the competence or whatever to understand contracts. And I'm not blaming them here. They're not lawyers. I mean, why should they? And they've often been dumped with huge amounts of jobs to allocate. They don't have time to read all the individual ins and outs of contracts. And I think a lot of them just don't even bother reading what they're sending to us, frankly. So I think we have to be very wary for those reasons, because they can be sending us a load of rubbish. And if we don't actually bother to read them, or at least the main points, we're recycling the loads of rubbish, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's what Nora says as well. I would be absolutely furious if someone changed a contract and didn't tell me. I think it's just a decent way of doing business to tell your business partners that you've changed stuff.
Yeah.
It's about trust.
Yeah, fully
true,
agree. Absolutely agree, Nora. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a good way to do
now
business.
we're going to go into no, not at all. But let's go into the horror side of this. The horror stories. What could happen to us without having a contract? I still remember one of my clients, an agency in the States, who just didn't give out contracts. And I insisted, partly because I wouldn't work without one, but also I could use an external reason. I could say, well, I'm building up contracts to become a member of a professional organization, for example. And he was like, well, why do you need a contract? And I'm like, well, who do I write to get paid? What's your address? What modality do I do that in? Do I have to do an invoice, or do you send me a PO? All of this should be in the contract, how I get paid, when I get paid, and so on, and whom I write to. And he was shocked. He was like, well, you just send me an email. And I'm like, I want it on paper.
Yeah.
So,
I think
I'm glad he was a friend.
So much,
oh my God.
There can be just too much sometimes informality, where maybe you've worked for that client a few times and they're saying, oh, well, you know the score, you know how we work, we don't really need to put anything in writing, do we? It's all going to be okay. And I just think we have to be very diplomatic, to keep in with them and all the rest of it. But we even if you're getting that kind of, oh, I'm too busy, and maybe I'll send it in next week, and you really think, I bet they won't. If they're not going to be proactive and put, what we've agreed in writing, then I really believe it's up to us as business people. Again, we need to put this in writing and send it to them. And then it's your judgment call as an interpreter, isn't it, as a business owner, to if you're not getting any response and the interpreting event day is looming and you still haven't had any response, well, you really need to write to them at some point and say, look, I've not had a response from you to my suggested draft contract. You then have to give them a deadline, really. If you can't if you can't sort of get back to me by in 2 days time or something like that, we can't really proceed. It's impossible
Right.
to, yeah, you need to do that. So somebody has to take the initiative here. But, you know, personally, that scenario you were describing just then, Julia, I would just really be wary of getting involved with that. It's just too vague. It's, yeah, however
Yeah.
nice they are and
Well,
you've worked with them
also,
before, and yeah.
and they're a friend, you know, but you still, especially among friends. In fact, I had a business partner when I lived in the United States, another interpreter, and we basically wrote a contract defining the terms of how we would cooperate with each other, because we wanted to cooperate with each other more often than, you know, just being assigned to a job with somebody else. We wanted to find business together and so on. And we had a contract. And it probably saved our friendship, because we're still very good friends today. And there were questions that arose, and we would just go back to the contract and say, oh, this is what it says, so it's okay. The other thing is I wanted to bring up, and this is more for people who are less familiar with the scams that are out there. There are people who try and scam us out of our money. And if you act super professionally and you don't do anything whatsoever without a contract, you'll scare the scammer away. So the best one that I know of is when somebody said, I will be, and they sent this to me personally, and so this is actual fact, I will be in Lyon in France, which is like several hours away, and there are tons and tons of interpreters in Lyon. Okay, so we're not even talking that. I will be in Lyon in 3 months' time for my friend's mother's funeral. Now, first of all, does she know she's going to be having a funeral in 3 months? But beyond that, I am going and I need somebody to help me because I will be speaking at this funeral. Will you, you know, could you send me an estimate of your fees, the hotel, the travel? They want as much money as possible.
Yes.
And you send them an estimate. Let's say it's 1,000. I like the number 1,000, and because it's easy. And they send you 1,000, and it's in your bank account as a cashier's check for 1,000, and it goes into your bank account. And then they write back after you've put it in, and they say, I'm so sorry, but I'm going, for personal reasons, I have to cancel. Could you send me my money back? And if you didn't have a contract with them stating that it's like 100% cancellation clause, whatever, you know, then you basically, you feel bound to, you know, honor bound to send them back their money. But then the cashier's check bounces 6 months later, and the bank then takes that 1,000 out of your own account, and you've just sent them 1,000 of your own money. If I had asked, I mean, I didn't ask, I just ignored the letter. I saved it because of the mother's funeral thing. Never should it happen. But if I had gone back and said, look, here's my contract, sign it, then they'd just run away. And so this is a really good way of protecting yourself from scammers as well.
Actually, that was a very interesting scam story. We have a fairly regular one like that in the UK, where the person is bringing, your husband often is bringing a very sick wife into the UK to basically use the National Health Service in the UK in London. And whilst they're here, they will need the services of an interpreter because they don't speak, or the wife doesn't speak English or whatever. And sometimes it's a bit of a difficult one, because many of us, you know, we're interpreters. We get offered all sorts of weird and wonderful interpreting jobs. I mean, I once was offered an interpreting job to interpret for a load of French psychiatrists who were going around high security prisons, you know, in the UK, to compare them with ones in France. And I thought, when I looked at that, you know, initial job description, I thought, can this be true? You know, I was imagining a minibus full of all these psychiatrists going around to prisons, but actually it turned out to be a bona fide job. So I can see really how colleagues could get sucked into, you know, the wife coming to the UK or going to California or whatever for the sunshine, you know, and beginning to think, oh yeah, that sounds like really, you know, quite a good job. It's going to be last for a week. But I think the number one clue there is when they're starting asking for bank details, perhaps
Yeah.
quite early on. That should be a red light.
Mm.
But like many interpreters, we are regularly, aren't we, giving out our bank details anyway to clients because we have to get paid.
It's true.
So
You do.
it's
And especially if you want to be paid up front. If you want to be
yeah.
paid up front, you're obviously going to be giving your bank details to somebody. Agnieszka has several good examples. If you don't have a contract, there's no cancellation fee, there's no booth, as the client assumed the interpreters would bring it. The wrong language combination. Yeah, I've seen that one too. Not enough booths, wrong hotel, same name in the same city. Oh my God. Wrong city, same name, different location, wrong date, all real life stories, not all mine. I'm just reminded of the fact that there is a desk in the um, where is it, in the airport in Austria, for all of the people who thought that they were actually traveling to Australia. There's actually an information desk just for people who got that wrong. So it's not a contract issue, but it's still something else. I mean, look at all the things that could go wrong if you don't have things spelled out.
And Julia, on the back of that, and Agnieszka has mentioned equipment and booths and so on, more and more, I don't know about over there, but in the UK, we are, we've got colleagues who are sort of becoming one-stop services where they're supplying not just themselves, but maybe a team of interpreters, but also equipment. They're making themselves responsible for supplying equipment. And as well as having an interpreting contract with a client, they're also setting up a side contract as regards the equipment hire and who's responsible if the equipment's lost, stolen, damaged, who's responsible for insuring the equipment when it's on site.
Yes.
So, you can actually have a lot of kind of, if you like, subcontracts to deal with these kind of issues as well.
It's true. It's true. Okay, we have one last quick question. Quick, short. So, and maybe it's a nonsense question, but how can we use a contract to our own advantage? Do you have any
because
any
we
thoughts?
want I honestly believe that negotiating has got to be negotiating contracts has got to be in our favor as much as possible. And I mentor, as you've mentioned earlier, Julia, quite a lot of colleagues who not only are wanting to draft their own terms and conditions for contracts, but also are being supplied with the client's version of contracts and being asked to sign them. And some of the more savvy ones will come to me and say, look, Sue, I'm really unhappy with clause 6 or 7. I think it's kind of worrying that, they're not agreeing to, for example, pay my subsistence, and I'm going to be working over a period of 3 days. They'll pay my hotel, they'll pay my train fare or my plane fare, but they will not give me any subsistence beyond the breakfast in the hotel. Is that fair? And so, that's just an example. But we should be negotiating contracts that actually benefit us. And when I'm with my mentees and we're looking at the draft contracts, because I always get them to do a bit of homework first, and I'm always sort of saying to them, you're giving a lot on a plate to the client here. You need to pull some of it back. You're being way too generous. Well, I mean, you can sort of say, if you're just saying, for example, cancellation can be with 24 hours from the start time or something like that. Well, that's way too short, really. Unless it's unavoidable, of course, maybe the event goes on fire or something like that. But, you really need to sort of introduce quite lengthy time periods, for them to notify you of this, that, and the other, whether it's materials or cancellations or, who you're going to be working with. If you're working with a partner interpreter, I think that's really vital information. Or do you have the right to choose your partner interpreter? That could be another clause. Or you actually put it in as you the interpreter will be responsible for choosing a partner interpreter who you want to work with. Make the
That's
contract
always
work,
nice.
really. Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, certainly as regards partner interpreters, I mean, I've 90% of the time been very lucky actually with partner interpreters, but not always. I mean, one notable partner interpreter wouldn't let me interpret other than when he felt it was okay to give me the floor kind of thing. And I've just never seen anything like it. And I didn't know him beforehand. I'd read some reviews and checked him out on the usual LinkedIn and so on, and he seemed to be okay. But I didn't have any colleagues that would work with him either. I couldn't get any sort of personal experience. So I think as a result, I probably wouldn't do that again. That was just a learning experience. But in future, I want to work with somebody I know, that somebody preferably that I can choose if necessary. So yeah, make it work for you.
And Agnieszka says additional copyright fees for recording and streaming have become a standard part of my offers, just in case as an on-site, no streaming, no recording event becomes an event with streaming onto Facebook or YouTube or somewhere else. I agree with that. I always have, in the United States, we are used to overtime. Everybody understands what overtime is. And so I've become used to, in the United States, adding in my contract an overtime clause. It will be prorated time and a half of the interpreting fee, and it starts as of whatever. And quite often the clients will say, but there will be no overtime. And I'll say, then you'll have no problems signing for it, right? Because if there is no overtime, then the clause won't kick in. But if there is overtime, at least we are both agreed on the fact that I will be paid for it, and I will not just be squeezed for it, as happens so often. So I think that some of these various clauses that just don't take place because it doesn't happen, like the YouTube, like the streaming that just won't happen. But if it gets streamed, I want to be compensated for it, is not a bad approach as well.
But I think that's a really interesting point that Agnieszka has raised about, if I've understood her properly, that maybe you've agreed to this particular interpreting assignment, but you didn't know it was going to be streamed until suddenly, or you didn't know it was going to be recorded, whatever. And this happens to a lot of my colleagues. They tell me suddenly this is happening, and they're actually live and they're actually working. And they're thinking, oh my God, and this is why we need to put clauses in contracts up front to say, that the interpreter's written, and I would usually go for written permission, must be sought if the conference organizers intend to live stream or record or whatever, because otherwise it can just happen to you.
It's true. Okay. So that was our last question. And so before we get to today's top tip, I just wanted to let everybody know that the next show will be after the summer break. And it pretty much should be about negotiating with a special guest who's an expert negotiator. So it should be pretty interesting. So if you have any questions or anything, send them in ahead of time. We haven't yet pinned down a date because he's very busy and I'm very busy. So we will figure it out, but it will be a Saturday at some point after the summer break. So today's top tip from Sue, and I think this is a really good one. Make sure to check out the model terms and conditions of your professional organization. So if you belong to CIOL, ITI, if you're in the US, ATA, I'm sure there, every association should have some type of model terms and conditions that you can use. Then it would certainly behoove you to take a look at them and use them as your own. Sue, did you want to comment more on that?
Yes, thank you. I certainly would say that these are generally fairly basic terms and conditions. They're not meant to be comprehensive, all encompassing, but rather than yourself sitting staring at a blank piece of paper thinking, how the hell do I draft terms and conditions? I don't know what to say. You've got some kind of basis to start with. And, you know, what you can start doing is just put them up on a screen from whatever organization, IEC or whichever one you've decided to look at, or indeed have a look at several, if you're a member of several professional organizations, and patch all the best bits together into your master or mistress copy. And, you know, as you go along and you get more experience and you think, oh, hang on, they're asking me to do some trial dates, you know, before the event or an hour before the event or something. And hang on, they're not mentioning that they're actually going to pay me. So you want to put in a clause about that. You know, these kind of things are more and more beginning to occur to us. Or they're asking me for the trial before the interpreting event to make myself available on 15th. And you're thinking, hang on, what, all day or the morning or the, I mean, when, you know, so you need, you know, a clause that's actually specifying this kind of thing. So yeah, have those ready. And like Julia said earlier, you know, I think the more we come over as business people who are running businesses, I know that sounds self-evident, but that's who we are. And we're not just interpreters, you know, we're at the end of the day entrepreneurs, you know, and business people. And frankly, without all the accessories to running a business, such as having proper documents and terms and conditions and being able to negotiate contracts, we're going to look a little bit amateur, really. And some clients will take advantage. Yeah. And some, you know, and agencies and so on will just wipe the floor with us otherwise, and do in some cases. So, you know, that's got to be my final message to you out there, you know. Be a business person.
And here Agnieszka comes in for one of our last words. The more you work, the more you learn and add to your contracts, and life teaches you the rest. There is no contract that's 100% bulletproof. And the sky is the limit when it comes to what clients can come up with. And I can say the other way around, the sky is the limit when it comes to what we can come up with in the client's eyes. So that's pretty much it. So I wanted to, and Chiara says, thank you, Julia and Sue. This has been such a brilliant session. I found the tick box list and I can speak, and the deadline for preparation materials very practical and sensible. I must say, you never really stop learning how to draft a bulletproof contract. And it all comes with experience and a bit of trial and error, unfortunately. And that's very true. And Nora wanted to say, as a little hint, the German VKD has a business camp, actually 3 levels of business camp, specifically geared towards conference interpreters, which will teach you all sorts of things having to do with business skills, negotiating contracts, and so on and so forth. If you have German, which unfortunately I do not, then you could attend that business camp. I have no idea when that might actually happen, but you can look it up, I'm sure. So thank you very much, Sue. This has been really educational. I haven't had such an in-depth conversation with anybody about contracts yet, and this has been really, really good. Remember that if you'd like to rewatch this recording, you can come back to LinkedIn to the event and find it here, or you can go to the KYW, the Know Your Worth YouTube channel, which link I will put in the comments below. And that's about it. Agnieszka just wanted to say also, this is a brilliant top tip, Sue, about the terms and conditions. Using the contract of a professional organization allows you to back up your own contract, and that such clauses are not your own whim. They are actually industry standard, which is a really good way of putting things.
I would just like to add there, Agnieszka, that is a really good point, because when you get some really difficult bolshy clients, and I think most of us deal with quite bolshy clients quite often, and they're just trying to make it out that you are being difficult because you're presenting them with a very detailed list of clauses and so on, contract. And then you can then say, well, actually, I've based these on those of my professional organization, which is IEC or CIOL or whatever. And these, like you said, Agnieszka, quite rightly, these are our industry standards. So therefore, you're showing them, that you are backed by your professional organization. You're not just being
and it's
difficult.
just their whim. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So thank you, everybody. And thank you everybody who's written in and said thank you, and for your comments that have contributed to making this be an even better conversation between Sue and myself. And we look forward to have a great summer. Have a great summer. I realize it's a little early. It's still only mid-July, but have a wonderful summer. And I'll see you back in the fall with something on negotiating. And I hope to see Sue sometime soon. She goes around and presents at various conferences in person and remotely. So you might end up seeing her talking about something like copyright in Carcassonne in the next few weeks or so. So have a great summer and see you guys next fall.
Or if you're in the UK, autumn.
So much for US and UK friendship.
We need an interpreter, Julia.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for inviting me.